Tool Legacy Entertainment, Act Life Media. I was scrolling after watching a live today on Instagram, and I got to a picture that I knew, and it shocked me after coming off of this other live and just looking at the picture. And of course, it was that of a person that had passed away recently. So on December 4th, Miss Ruby Dell Side passed away, evidently. And Miss Ruby Dell Side is the matriarch, I would say the lead matriarch of This Is It Soul Food. And she's one that if you went to This Is It Soul Food down on Blodgett, or even down when they were on Gray years ago, over 13 years ago, then she was there. She was also in the Jason's Lyric movie, along with Mr. Joseph, who currently owns This Is It, and Miss Joseph. I was privileged to be selected to take the reins of the documentary that This Is It was doing. Miss Jessica Wesley was searching for someone to take over the reins of it. She had another director in there that had worked on the project for 2 years up until 2020. And so I was notified of this by another filmmaker, and this was October 2020. So by October 31st, by Halloween, Jessica decided that she wanted me to take on this project. And it became larger than what it was initially supposed to be. Jessica initially wanted someone to wrangle the footage, so just editing, not any directing or anything, but taking the footage that they had, the pictures, and to wrangle that together and create a cut for the film. Initially, she said maybe 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, somewhere in there. Definitely not an hour at the time. And I helped to convince her that the project was larger than that. She wanted something that was basically just for the family and for their kids to see, her and Thad Wesley's kids to see. I came into the project and I knew that it was a much larger project from the footage that I saw and from the stories that they had. And I ended up directing more interviews. I didn't have the chance to interview Miss Ruby Dell. We kept everything. I used everything, or I used the footage that was already there that she was a part of, which it was probably an hour and a half of footage totally with just her, and even some of it with her and one of their kinfolks. But she was at the screening. She was at that initial screening, December 28th, I believe, December 28th, right after Christmas in 2020. That was a rough cut, very rough cut. But her story is throughout, because I changed the aspect of it, and just instead of just having a documentary, I offered Jessica the chance to create a narrative of it. I wanted people to see and feel them and hear them. So I was able to bring in a small group of people as actors and actresses, and they performed. And one of those characters was, of course, Ruby Dell Side. Ruby Dell Side was the daughter of the original owners of This Is It. This Is It opened in 1959, and Frank and Mattie Jones, Mr. and Mrs. Frank and Mattie Jones, Frank and Mattie Jones were the initial owners of that restaurant. They also had another it was a little bar that they started before that, called the Zanzibar. It wasn't necessarily just a restaurant, but it was more like a juke joint, considered a juke joint. And then Ruby Dell took over that juke joint once This Is It was established in 1959. So Ruby Dell was there from the beginning. And she was the one, when she told that story, I heard the video, and I kept watching it. And it just resonated when she said, they went on a ride. She went on a ride with her parents, and they got to a location, and Frank had picked out this spot that he wanted Miss Mattie to see. And Ruby Dell was with them, and it was like, this is it. She remembered her mother, Mattie Jones, saying, this is it. And that's where This Is It came from. This Is It. It's in Houston, based in Houston, Texas. It was in Fourth Ward initially. The first several locations were in Fourth Ward off of Gray, and then it moved over. It moved over 2009 to Blodgett. But Miss Ruby Dell was a big part of that. And so in creating her character, I went by the pictures, because at that point I had not met her, but I looked at her pictures and I constructed this character based on the things that she said in the video, but also based on old pictures. She was a person that liked to get out and party, liked to dance, and liked to be happy. And she would have probably been, the way that I looked at the pictures, the life of the party. But she was also, matter of fact, she held a lot of that history in. That was history that Mr. Craig, which was her son, Mr. Craig absorbed that. And then, of course, he became a part of that history, because the restaurant, they were born the same year. He was born the same year that This Is It was actually born. And so that was really important. Miss Ruby Dell Side was really important. She worked in the restaurant. She did things when she was like a mainstay. She did things when they had turnover rates. You know, with restaurants, sometimes you have turnover rates that you might not be able to control, some higher than others. But she was a mainstay that would be there, and she would work. And I believe she also, she knew a lot of those recipes. I believe she helped in maintaining those. But when Craig was moving forward with ownership, he obtained the restaurant. He bought it for a specific amount of money, for $1 from his dad or his grandfather, Frank. And he purchased This Is It in 1993. And he's the key to how This Is It got into the movie Jason's Lyric with Alan Payne and Jada Pinkett Smith. The movie would not have gotten This Is It in there, because Mr. Frank was totally against it. He wasn't interested in those things. He didn't look at those types of things in terms of commercial business or anything. He was a no-nonsense guy. And so Miss Ruby Dell was in that mix. You know, by 1993, she was in that mix somewhere. She might not have had a decision in the sale or anything of it to her son, but she was still a part of that family. They maintained that dynamic within the restaurant, because Mr. Frank was going to sell it off to someone that offered him a certain amount of money, cash money, one day. But Miss Ruby Dell Side was there all along. She was there throughout the development, the further development, because they kept getting better spots, kept getting better locations. And then, you know, when it was time to change some attitudes behind the counter, because some of those workers had some fiery attitudes. People love the food, but they did have some fiery attitudes. She was still a part of that. She maintained being a part of that over the years. And I want to say she probably worked off and on within This Is It. I know at least through 2020. During some of those interviews, she said she was still working there, and she might have worked even after that. She didn't totally retire from there. She didn't. So it was with sadness that I saw that post with her passing away. I made sure that I called Jessica first and called Mr. Craig, but I wouldn't even go into the details of how much importance this story, with the This Is It story, 40-Weight Gravy, how important she was in my life within those last 18 months to 2 years. I was director and editor, and it was up to me to put this thing together, to wrangle everything together and put together a solid product. I had to know these people. And so I'm going over that footage over and over and over again. I've seen it by the time it's come out. I've seen those things like hundreds of times, the clips, and I've seen her hundreds of times, and I've heard her voice. I know her cadence. And as a filmmaker that was creating like the biography and the dramatic side of this, I felt like I had to know her. I had to know her a little bit, although I didn't talk to her face to face and just pick her brain because she had been interviewed enough. But I wanted to make sure that I got somebody that represented her right in the movie. And I believe the young lady did a good job. Latoya did a great job at embodying her. And she came as a referral. And the person that referred her, they made a good choice without knowing who Ruby Dell was. They made a good choice because Latoya, she knows how to party. She knows how to mimic things also, but she could also add some other dialogue to it and bring the dialogue out. But it doesn't take much direction in terms of getting her to where I needed her to be. And we were doing it really, really quickly. It was a small, that part of it was a really, really small budget. Overall, it was a small budget, but I put together some dollars from This Is It, and I really thank them for that. But in order to bring, especially that first chapter together, that first chapter was very dramatic. It was more dramatic than parts 2, 3, and 4. If I was to enhance the project, I would want to go back and add more acting, more dramatic stuff to chapters 2, 3, and 4. 4 is more of a current chapter, which involved the kids, which is, I believe, like the 4th generation and going into the 5th generation. So I would have to find people to do that. Characterizing a person that is passed away and that you don't have many pictures of, it could be tough. You really have to bear down and go into history and reach out to people that knew them. And then you have to create this character. Sometimes it could be just as hard doing that for somebody that is still living. And that's what I had to do. I wanted to portray someone on both ends. I had 2 people that had passed away years ago that we had to figure out in terms of characterization. And then also someone that was living, and that was Miss Ruby Dell Side. And it's important because you want that person to be able to look at themselves and say, okay, I agree with that. Or you made good choices. I understand. Everything's not going to be right because there are some things that you change here and there. Some people are really sticklers about employing somebody that looks like the original character that they're portraying. But it's also really about embodying who that person was. So Denzel Washington does not look like Malcolm X. He doesn't. But once he was finished with that movie, and after the last frame was gone, and you saw the credits again, and you see Malcolm X, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute. I was just watching Denzel as Malcolm X. This is the real Malcolm X. He embodied the character so great that people really believed that was Malcolm X that they were looking at. That's a task. It does not happen all the time. Therefore, I wanted Miss Ruby Dell Side to be happy about how she was portrayed. And I only got one comment about it, one kind of negative comment about it, but it wasn't about the actress. It was just about how her interview went. And like I said before, I didn't do the interview. She wanted the framing higher on herself. And that was it. So I knew that we were in a good space with the movie. So yeah, I really appreciated having to go through that and really trying to understand who she was in order to create that character. But I'm glad I had the opportunity to work within that and to bring her character to life. I just wanted to make sure that she was okay with how she was portrayed. And the feedback that we got was that the initial time she saw the film in the theaters, there wasn't any reenactment in there. She saw how she was being portrayed, or how her interviews were cut together, which at that point, it was just a small portion of her interviews were in there at that point. And that was very important. It was very important in how This Is It began. So she was okay. And the family was okay with how they were being portrayed, with the exception of maybe one person. But yeah, she was definitely okay with that. The portrayal, I believe she was okay with that. Once she saw the reenactments, I hadn't heard her response to that, but I feel like I would have heard something if she didn't like it, if she didn't enjoy that. And I know I would have heard something if Craig didn't enjoy it and if Jessica didn't enjoy it, because I was 1-on-1 with Jessica. It was really Jessica's project. She was heading it up for the family because she wanted to basically document, this is it, the importance of their family structure and the way the family was placed into business, the way they maintained business. She's interested in the history of it and how they are looked at as pioneers within Houston, because they are the oldest soul food restaurant in Houston, possibly in the state. So Jessica was an instrumental part of that. Miss Ruby Dell Side was an instrumental part of that. And I just hope for continued prayers within that family. I hope that they have a pouring in of prayers and support in that time. There's no good time to have a loss such as that. There's no good time to have something like that. It's just something that we have to deal with. That's just a part of life. And with them running business, the people that This Is It has supported, now it's time for, those people to come back and support This Is It, even more so than they already have. Continue prayers. Ag Life Media, to a Legacy Entertainment.